Well, I come from a very sort of quiet area in the south, in the sort of South Durban Basin area, which is Merebank. And I mean, it's way back in the sort of early 50s, it was a community that was pretty much wood and iron buildings and very much corrugated roads and those sort of things. And I came from an extremely large group of people. We had several brothers and their children and their children. And there were many, many individuals in the homes where we stayed. So if there was anything like you wanted to play football or play cricket, we had a team always ready for that. And it was quite interesting. But following from that, I went to a primary school, which was Merebank Government-Aided Indian School. And this was, I started in 1950, following which, after the primary school certificate, you move on to high school. And the high school days were in Clearwood High, which is down in Clearwood, and the school is still very much there. But the sort of memories of childhood have been quite interesting. As children, we would always get up to mischief. We had fairly sort of wild areas in and around. We would go and snack on the little berries and things. And this would go on all the time. I mean, we had mango trees and pear trees and avocados and all those sort of things. So it was quite an interesting childhood. Lots of fun, lots of game. You can play at night. I mean, when summer came, you could watch the swallows go past, and also you could see the flying ants come out in summer. And it was very, very interesting. But as a child, I always had a passion for plants and animals. And this has really, in a way, set me up or prepared the platform for what I am today, in a way. I used to be fascinated by watching little galls that used to form on young twigs. And I would break these galls open and have a look at the insects inside. I also recall, as children, you would be snacking on these berries. And we go back to an interesting time when I was really eating figs, which really occurred wild on the bluff. But these figs were very interesting. They were very tiny structured things, but within them they had little wasps which were their pollinators. This was now really in the early 50s, late 50s, early 60s. As children we used to do this. But what is interesting, there is a moral to the story, a childhood story, because finally in my later life, I end up studying the pollination of the self-same fig, the one from which I ate all these little wasps. And the interesting thing is, together with a student, I studied the pollination of this plant. And many years later, the specialist, who's the entomologist based in Holland, decided he was going to name this little wasp after me. And really, I'm a botanist, but for once, I'm a botanist who doesn't have a plant named after him. But this is a very interesting situation, because this little wasp, Elizabethiella BAIJNATH, has been named after me. And maybe later we can have a look at some of the pictures of this little wasp, as we would see a little later. After my high school days, I ended up at Salisbury Island, which you may remember, may not remember, but this was the only university for Indian people. It was the University College of Indians, where people of Indian origin were the only ones that were allowed to go to Salisbury Island. And this I started in the early 1960s. I read through the first degree there. But unlike primary school, secondary school was very tough for me. But I found the postgraduate studies at university were very, very trying. It was a challenge. I really had to work very hard to get this Bachelor of Science degree. But following my Bachelor of Science degree, life changed a great deal. I realized I was really meant to be a researcher, someone who could go out and look at a problem, or go out and visit a flower and find out what is going on, or look at an animal, or look at the plant-animal interactions. I'd really found my niche there. So during my honors days, I had a project on the Clearwood Racecourse. And the project was an ecological one, and it was supervised by my old mentor and colleague, Roddy Ward, who might be present here tonight. And this is very interesting because on this field, in the early, or in the late 60s, around about 1968, I collected what I call now very passionately as the racecourse lily. Now, the racecourse lily is a red-hot poker, but it's a yellow-flowered one, unfortunately. And it has been one of our plants which has migrated or was taken by people to Europe way back in the early 70s, 1700s, I mean. And it was really a plant which has been established in Europe, especially in England. I mean, in the south of Ireland, you would find that there are red-hot pokers which now grow pretty wild in the Mediterranean climate. But getting back to this red-hot poker, the racecourse lily has taught us quite a great deal. There has been major sort of liaison with the people at the racecourse, the managers out there, and also the municipality as a whole. There's this partnership that has been built all around trying to conserve this little plant. It is found only at this site. It has been found nowhere else. If we go back to the history of this plant, it's very interesting. Round about 1841, in August on the 8th, Wahlberg left Kungela and he used his oxen and ox wagon, and he spent the night at Umlaas. Now, on the next morning, which was really a very drizzly morning, Wahlberg and his team were on their way to what he called Pietermaritzburg. And they stopped at a place called Klipfontein, which I think was probably the last site before I found this plant, which had been probably be in the Pinetown area where this little red-hot poker was originally collected. The type of this specimen from 1841 sits at the National Museum in Sweden. And I've been rather fortunate to have seen an image of this plant. But the interesting thing is, prior to my collecting this plant, it was collected by Rayburn round about early 1950 and also in 1954, until I found this plant round about 1968 while doing this honours project. So my honours project has been quite interesting, and really this plant, as you can see in the field behind me, is in full flower, and it has been conserved ex situ now, but it is also present in the Claude Racecourse. But as you jolly well know, the Claude Racecourse now is up for sale, and really I'm begging the powers that be to try and conserve this little patch where this last living population of a rarity of the Greater Durban area is still alive. And really, if we want to keep anything for Durban, my feeling is we should conserve a site irrespective of what happens to the Claude Racecourse. Well, it was, in a sense, it was excitement, and in a sense also confusion, and the thought that, well, what have I done to deserve this award? I mean, I've been a simple biologist or biodiversity scientist or botanist, to call me what you like, who worked in the Greater Durban area. I've been collecting specimens in the Greater Durban area, and these are housed in a herbarium. And I've also worked as a curator at the herbarium. And a herbarium is like a library which has books, but a herbarium has dried plants. So in a sense, I was still at university, I was going through my emails, and then Ngidi Tobela calls me and gives me this news, and I says, well, you sure you're right? I mean, is this, and who are these people that put me up to this? And he says, no, you've had some very concerned and dedicated colleagues together with your school principal, and also, you know, people like Jean Senegal, who's working for WESA, and a very well-known person have put me up. And I says, look, I'm really humbled. I feel in a way elated within, but I'm sure there are many more people in our municipality who are as well or better qualified than me to actually get this award. this is a very interesting question. And in a sense, I cannot pinpoint any one person who has been responsible for where I've got in life. A lot of the challenges or the goals that I have achieved were self-generated and self-taught, and I would put out a little target and say, I will work towards this. But if I go back to my childhood days, I would say it would have been my parents, and my parents, well, my dad was a market gardener, and maybe there was a little bit of influence of market gardening, growing plants and growing flowers and taking it out to the local Indian market on Saturday mornings. But besides that, it would have been my friends, my cousins, my relatives, and all the large extended family that I have. And I was probably pretty much the odd one out, because I was the one always running away in the bush and looking at plants and looking at the wasps and looking at what the bats were doing at night or what the birds were visiting. And really, I think in much later life, then it would have been my lecturers. And I've thoroughly enjoyed my postgraduate days. And maybe if I add to my postgraduate life, after my master's degree, I went off to England and did a PhD. And I was very fortunate to have spent time at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, where I did my degree. And I was based at the Jodrell Lab. And that was a very interesting time of my life, and in many ways created the path for me as a curator of a herbarium, because I had the opportunity to work at one of the largest herbariums in the world, and this is the Kew Herbarium in Kew Gardens. I think maybe the practical involvements that I've had with an inquiring mind and wanting to learn why things happen, or why is this color, or what is going on when you see a bird flying or a wasp emerging. These are sort of, I've been a very curious person. I would pick up something and break it open, smell it, bite it, taste it, and see exactly what is going on. But I was really fascinated by the living things, the plants, the insects, the little wasps. And maybe I could go back to my original sort of fig stories, or my interactions with plants and animals, like my current interactions with a big family that I'm working on, the Strelitziaceae, which has 3 different genera, and these 3 different genera are found in 3 different parts of the world. We have Ravenala sitting in Madagascar, we have Strelitzia on our continent, and really, if we look back at Strelitzia reginae, the bird of paradise, it has been something that South Africa should be extremely proud of, and something which South Africa made available to the world, and it's an iconic plant. You look at it and it is available in every part of the world. It's growing in California, and the Californians in Los Angeles think it is their sort of the plant, the real plant for Los Angeles. It is their sort of their city emblem. I mean, here also in KZN, Durban also has Strelitzia reginae as its emblem for the gardens, or I wouldn't say emblem for the gardens, but emblem for the eThekwini municipality. Strelitzia is a very fascinating plant, and maybe, certainly at the moment, we have different color forms of Strelitzia. We have what was called the Kirstenbosch Gold, which was bred over many, many years at Kirstenbosch from the early 70s, and it was relaunched after Kirstenbosch Gold, and it was relaunched as something which is now being popularly known as Mandela's Gold. And we could see this plant, which is now really an iconic plant, very favored. But Strelitzias are interesting plants because they are pollinated by birds. You would find birds visit these flowers, they would sit on the flowers and pick up nectar, and in that sort of way, they would pollinate our flowers. And really, Strelitzias, we have 5 species in Africa. We have reginae, we have the Nicolai, which is the Natal wild banana. We have Strelitzia cordata, which is widespread and goes right up into the highlands of Zimbabwe. We have Strelitzia albi in the Eastern Cape, and also we have a juncus-related Strelitzia which is found in the Uitenhage area, Strelitzia junctia. And that is a very interesting thing, and maybe I would let you into a little secret. Currently, Kirsten Bosch is breeding junctia to launch next year, and I don't want to take the thunder out of their thing, because this would be launched, I'm hoping it would be launched as something which we would like to call as maybe Junctia Gold or something like that. I have enjoyed what I've done in life. The opportunity to spend and train postgraduate students, whether they're from honors level or to PhD level, to get the joy out of seeing them graduate. And really, over and above that, I also have a passion, and maybe I was very fortunate in life because I have the ability to work with people at the very lowest level to right up at the international level. And I've had the opportunity to work with school children, where I've had major school planting programs, and I go back with the school now for over 20 years. I would train students, tell them about the birds, the bees, the flowers and the trees, you know, those sort of things, and inculcate in them the greening program, the need to preserve, and also the issues of biodiversity. Why should we conserve? Why is it necessary to have these different living organisms so that we have one relying on the other to make our biodiversity to be balanced? But getting back over and above that, I've also had the opportunity to work with research programs, to work at higher levels, to work at the level of say, organizing international conferences. And I've had the opportunity to do that at our visitors center here in the Durban Botanic Gardens. You may recall Rio, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, which was held in Rio in 1992. We were very fortunate because South Africa won the bid in 2002, and Rio Plus 10 was held as the Johannesburg Summit in 2002. And in preparation for the Johannesburg Summit, we decided to hold an international conference at the Durban Botanic Gardens, and this we had a partnership with the eThekwini municipality. We've had an international meeting which included all the tertiary institutions from the Durban area, including also the International Union of Biological Sciences and the Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment, two committees which I have served at the international level of, which would be SCOPE and also IUBS. And these were organizations, which were international organizations that bought into this conference. The conference was held at the Durban Visitors Center, and I serve on the trust of the Durban Botanic Gardens. And this was a very successful conference. We've had an output which you would see a little later. The book which came out of that, we had 20 presentations, and these were pretty hard work, and these were captured and produced as a volume. Now, during this conference, I would like to mention that I've had the support of a colleague, Dr. Yashika Singh, who worked together with me, and together we've produced this book, and it was called The Renaissance, which was based on life sciences and environmental sciences. And the book that eventually emerged was called Rebirth of Science in Africa. And it was a worthwhile publication which was sponsored by the National Research Foundation and also other tertiary institutions, including SCOPE and IUBS. The 2002 meeting that was held in Johannesburg, the sort of Rio Plus 10 as they call it, was a point where issues relating to the earth, issues relating to humanity, issues relating to biodiversity were all discussed. And it was a major sort of meeting which brought in people from all over the world. But there were 5 things which stood out very clearly. The issue of water, the issue of energy, the issue of health, agriculture, and biodiversity. These are the 5 things which we need a reasonable balance and respect for on our planet Earth, which is so very fragile at the moment. Because as humans, or as man or woman on this continent, we are viciously and with complete disrespect consuming far more than we require. And it is well known that the amount of energy, food and resources that the developed parts of the world not only consume, waste, would be more than enough to cater for this whole earth of ours. And I believe also, in regard to addressing these problems, one has to start very early to instill in children the values of these different resources that this earth provides for us. I mean, I don't want to go into the issues of climate change, warming of the planet and those sort of issues, but I believe that, you know, we might be close to the 6th extinction, but that is not the issue. The issue is this earth has the ability to go back and to go forward depending over millions and millions and millions of years. So my view on this would be we need to educate people, and education is so important because without education, you're going nowhere. And education is very vital to the survival of our race and also to all the living organisms on this earth of ours. Maybe I should add that I am really a person who works for the applied side of the sciences. I'm really a hands-on scientist, pretty much experimental, pretty much in the field, and always enjoying the interactions with nature and the fellow human beings and animals that I work with. I've had a large number of postgraduate students from honors level up to PhD level, and each one of these students is really a character on their own. One needs very much to understand a student, to know their backgrounds, and also to appreciate their strengths and weaknesses. What I normally do with a postgraduate student or a student who is interested in a project, I would spend about 2 hours with them. I would sit down with them, talk to them about their needs, their background, and what it is, or is it, that really inspires them, or what is it that really tickles their fancy, or whatever you'd like to say. What is it that they live for? And on the basis of that, I would select a project to especially harness the strengths of these students. One, I feel, needs to build on strengths of any individual if you expect to get the most out of them. And I've had a pretty good working relationship with postgraduate students. I still have several of them which I work with, and I work at a couple of institutes in the Greater Durban area. And this would not be at undergraduate level because really I've been built as a field scientist, a hands-on scientist, and a research scientist, always experimental, and a scientist who's out there to go out to find the answers and to make the rest of the world know what the answers are. Well, maybe there are a few awards I'd like to share. Not many, I mean, I just have a few awards. But I mean, the thought of having the opportunity to achieve some of these things, I feel has been the greatest sort of, in a way, the strength and also the thing that has made me appreciate what I do in life. The opportunities that have come my way to make these little things happen. And I could go back to the very early days when I was a student, having worked on sedges, and you could see some sedges at the back there. And these sedges were something I spent 3 years of my life with. I worked in the field, go out into the marshland, go out into the swamp, collect specimens, and it has been very interesting because in 1972, when I had described, I would say, 2 new species of sedges, the time was right for me to say now, the type locality of one of these sedges is Mauritius. And I would like to have the opportunity to go to Mauritius to see this specimen in the field, in the wild. And it was really for me an experience, an exhilaration to go to Perea Nature Reserve to see this little sedge in Mauritius growing there and growing wild in its original habitat. And this was something which was collected way back in the 1841s, and it still grows wild in the Durban area. It grows, it is distributed from ways down south to as far as Shlui in the St. Lucia area and those sort of areas. But having finished this master's degree, the next challenge was knocking on my door. And I had this passion for sedges, and I says, there is only one place I want to go to, and it has to be the Jodrell laboratory where all this exciting work goes on the anatomy of the sedges. I had a British Council scholarship, and I was very, very pleased to get this. It was a 3-month scholarship which gave me the opportunity to go to England, and I was based at the Jodrell laboratory. And this was extremely exciting to know, you know, this book is coming out on the anatomy of the sedges, and to meet the person, Professor Metcalf himself. And when you go to the Jodrell laboratory, you think, oh, it's a conveyor belt where sections are being cut on one side. But it was so laid back. People were looking down the microscope, looking at their sections and slowly drawing their sections and describing their anatomy. And I was very fortunate. And I worked on a group of sedges for those 3 months. And it was the first paper that I wrote in an international journal, and it came out in the Q Bulletin. And it was really exciting to see, you know, you are getting the rewards of the benefits and also of the efforts you made. And then I come back and go off back to England to do a PhD degree. And it was really exciting. I was registered with a specialist in botany, and this was in the department at Reading, which was the best taxonomy department in the world. And I was very fortunate to have all those 3 years spent not at Reading, but I was based at the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. And I worked on a group of plants which are really African plants. These are bulbines which occur from the Cape going right up to Abyssinia, and there are about 70-odd species of these plants. And I spent 3 years studying these plants, and it was real joy. And to come back to these bulbines in the country, having described several new species of bulbines, and during the study at the Jodrell, a very exciting thing happened. The Jodrell laboratory was something which I, in a sense, worshipped. It was the year where I learned plant anatomy. And bulbines are yellow-flowered species which are distributed throughout the continent, but I found a group of bulbines which were white-flowered. And these were 3 different species of bulbine. And I thought very seriously about this, and I thought that these 3 white-flowered bulbines deserved a different status. And I thought, who should I honor with this white-flowered bulbines? And I took the opportunity to name these bulbines after the institute, and these were 3 species of Jodrellia. And Jodrellia was really from the laboratory, the Jodrell lab, where I worked for those 3 years. And that was really exciting for me. Having come back to South Africa, I continued with my research endeavors. I joined the University of Durban-Westville as a curator of the herbarium, and then I got into the botanical world within the country. I served on the board of the South African National Biodiversity Institute on several sort of sessions I've had with them, and it was very interesting because you were now at a level where you were deciding the future of botany in the country. And it was extremely interesting to see this happen. And having had that opportunity to direct botany within the country, I've also had the opportunity to rise up the ranks and eventually be the president of the South African Association of Botanists. And that was an extremely, I think, a very humbling situation to think, having come back as a student from this country, having worked in the field, having climbed the ladders, having been, in a sense, forced to leave the place and go and do a degree abroad so that somebody recognizes you and not tell you, hey, your master's degree, which you received cum laude, was not good enough to employ you here. So I says, I will go abroad and come back with a degree that you cannot take away from me. And eventually I end up getting the silver medal for botany in this country. And that was a very, very rewarding, in a sense, humbling, and to say, well, maybe I am worth it, having been the president of the South African Association of the Botanists and being recognized to get a silver medal from that same organization was very, in a way, humbling. And I'm very, very, in a way, pleased that those years of working in the field, those years of interacting, and I've been delivered papers overseas to do with botany and to do with the work I worked on figs, and I've already spoken about the figs, and it has been very, very rewarding to have achieved these things. In a way, you know, life has gone a whole big circle. You start off as a student and then you are really the person directing those same students today. If I would like to leave behind, it would be those red hot pokers you see at the back. The Cloud Racecourse lily would be something I feel that when I'm gone, it is still flourishing in the fields and it is still available there and it is still available for people to see. And over and above that, we have major threats in this country. And one of the threats in the country has to do with invasive alien species. And invasive alien species could be plants and also animals. I mean, we have some invasive birds in the country. I mean, the myna you see out there is an invasive thing. It's not one of ours. And also you find guavas in the country, which are wild in the country. And really, these guavas are not one of ours. But I'd like to maybe dwell a little more to see what I've left behind. And I want to leave behind, besides the racecourse lily, I also like to talk about the Durban guava. The Durban guava is a plant which has originated in this city. It is a new plant to the city. It's a new hybrid to the city. And really, it's a vigorous one. And it's going to be very difficult to destroy this alien invasive in our midst. But what has happened, we've found that in the greater Durban area, we have about 5 different species of guavas. We have the common old guava, which is edible, Psidium gojava. We have the other parent of this Psidium times durbanensis, which is Psidium guernense. And besides these 3 species, we have 2 other species, which are the Catalese guavas. Now, the Catalese guavas are really the purpose Catalese guava, Psidium cattleyanum, and I mean, if you go for a holiday to Mauritius, the whole island is taken over by guavas, and the Catalese guava is a wretched pest in Mauritius. It has taken over the guava areas. And besides the Catalese guava, we have another Psidium cattleyanum, and this is Psidium cattleyanum lucidum, which is a yellow-flowered Catalese guava. So what I leave behind in my legacy is a wretched alien invasive, which is Durban times durbanensis, Psidium times durbanensis, and also this racecourse lily that you see here. And over and above that, I've left a lot of new species, and also those students that I trained are going to be teaching botany, are going to be talking about biodiversity, or also talking about plants, animals, and also the living things. And also, I believe and I'm hoping that these are the people that would give life to this earth of ours, to look to after, to protect and to also make certain we don't lose some of these gems that are around us today. Yes, I do have several involvements with the municipality. In fact, the Durban municipality is really a partner to every tertiary institution in this area. The Durban municipality, as you know, has MOUs signed with the herbarium around the corner, South African National Biodiversity Institute, which is in one corner of the herbarium. It has also signed MOUs with the Durban University of Technology, which is around the corner, and the Mangosuthu University of Technology, together with the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And I am based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and we have an arrangement or an understanding that we share all our research issues with them. Now, getting back to some of the issues that I share with the municipality in my personal capacity, and one of them is ongoing, and this has got to do with tree planting, Arbor Day, and also issues relating to the greening of Greater Durban area. I work very closely with the Durban Botanic Gardens. I'm a trustee of these gardens. I've been a trustee from inception, which is over 20 years now. We've worked very closely as a trust with the Durban municipality. We are partners, we share a lot. The trust provides training for parents, it provides training for school children, it provides permaculture courses, it has an education, environmental education center. We have the Durban Botanic Gardens center down here, which we would see a little later. But over and above this, I have adopted a school from the early 80s. I've adopted a school that I've been working with, and we would go back to the school a little later. I've worked with the school for well over 20 years. Every year I interact with the parents and also with the teachers, and most importantly, I interact with these children. We go back to the Umgeni River, we look at pollution in the river, we have a tree planting session at the river, and I have a tree planting session with the school for well over 20 years now. Seeds that I've planted 20 years ago are now fruiting, and to go to these trees and say, wow, this was a tree I planted 20 years ago, and look at it, the birds are building nests, the plants are taking, the figs have grown, the wasps are around, and also late at night you come back and you hear the Wahlberg bats, the fruit bats are out in the evenings, they're taking the figs, and you would go back in the morning and you see the droppings on the floor. So I worked very closely with the eThekwini municipality, especially the parks and gardens, the place where I'm sitting today. And I work very closely with them in regard to tree planting. I provide seeds for them. They give me trees for the school. And this is ongoing. I have people come out from Randall's. Teddy Governor comes out there and we look at the trees. We take on every year about 20 trees, and we could go back and have a look at some of these trees. So I think one cannot overlook the people of tomorrow. You cannot look at these budding youngsters. You cannot overlook these children, that tomorrow they would be the person that we need to get these messages through, and those would be the people that would be able to lead the future generations. Well, thank you. This was a very enjoyable thing, and I mean, look at the sort of geese have come to join us also at this stage, and it's very interesting. You know, it's alive in these gardens. Whether it's the geese down here, and also if you come late at night, I mean, besides these wretched cats that we have here, we have bats here. We have very interesting things in these gardens.